Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Tourpreneur, the travel business podcast. I am here finally with a man that I've wanted to interview for years. In fact, I remember bumping into him a few years ago at the Skift Global Forum and saying, I want to have you on the podcast. He said, yeah, let's get something on the calendar. And here we are 3 years later. So I'm finally here with Evan Frank, who is currently the CEO and co-founder of Fora Travel, but his resume in the tours and activities and travel industry space in general is much more extensive than that. So rather than introduce him, I want to just dig in and hear from him not only what he's been up to over his many years as an entrepreneur, and then also we're going to dive into Fora Travel and their focus on travel advisors, which is always a big topic in our community of tour operators, because how do you work with them? What does the space look like today? It's undergone a massive transformation over COVID, especially. And Evan Frank, welcome to Tourpreneur.
Thank you, Mitch, for having me. It's great to be here, and of course, nice to see you again.
I do want to start with your background a little bit. Could you just walk us through your path as an entrepreneur through the kind of travel and hospitality industry?
Sure. So I think the way that I describe it is I'm sort of an accidental travel and hospitality entrepreneur, because at this point, a decade and a half ago, I was a co-founder of a business called One Fine Stay. One Fine Stay was, in many ways, a pioneer in the short-term rental industry. So what we did was not exactly what Airbnb does. We were actually essentially a hotel management company for homes. So we took responsibility for the guest experience, as well as the homeowner experience. And we were the brand that you booked with. So you weren't staying at Evans Flats. We were in London at the time. But you weren't staying at Evans Flat. You were staying at this home that has this name. And we would, make the beds with linen towels and, toiletries the way like a real hotel would. So I ran the U.S. operations for that business as part of the original founding team that started for a company that started in London. In some ways, the experience with One Fine Stay had led me to where I am today, which is in 2014 or 2015, we were discovering that as a boutique hospitality company, one of our main challenges, if not the main challenge, was not service experience as much as distribution. So sales, marketing, and distribution. It was getting to the point where anything we did, we were competing against the OTA. So we were either bidding for keywords on Google. This was really before Facebook advertising took off. That had become too expensive because we couldn't bid to the same level of lifetime value expectations that like Booking.com or Expedia could. Or we could distribute through the OTA and lose a lot of our uniqueness and merchandising capability, and also pay, of course, an arm and a leg for those heads on beds. And so around that same time, travel agents started calling us. We had no idea that travel agents still existed. And that led to a decade-long now plus discovery of this industry. One Fine Stay was ultimately purchased by the largest non-U.S. hotel management company called Accor Hotels, based out of Paris. I stayed as CEO of the group within One Fine Stay for a year, and then decided to pursue my next challenge. My next challenge was being the hired CEO of a very special tours and activities business. That's how you and I know each other. Because at least then, Mitch, you would guide for us a business called Context Travel, which was essentially tours for the intellectually curious, right? So small group or private tours, so no more than 6 guests on the tour in places of culture and places of history. So classically, if you're going to go to Rome, you should visit the Vatican. And we believe the right way to do that is with a scholar who's actually studied our history and can give you that tour in a private setting. So I ran that business as CEO for about 3 years. Turns out that at that point, I was a travel and hospitality entrepreneur because I understood how the industry worked and essentially how multi-channel distribution worked at scale. So I adapted the same playbook from One Fine Stay, and we went hard into the agency world. And that ended up becoming our growth channel there, as well as it had become our growth channel at One Fine Stay in sort of the latter years. And so that's how I got involved with the tours and activities and experiences community and learned a lot about that community. One Fine Stay had a rough pandemic, as I think anyone in travel did. I chose to leave that business at the beginning of 2021 and didn't know what I was going to do, but I kept on thinking about travel agents and how interesting it was that folks like you and I, or the friends that you would talk to, really had no idea that travel agents still existed. They didn't really understand or misunderstood a lot of the core value proposition to travel agents. And I think I come at it from a sensitivity of being the provider itself, and how agency business done well is really just OTA business from a distribution standpoint, but with higher quality clients and lower overall costs. So Fora is now a 3-year-old business, and we have a large community of advisors all over the world, but mostly concentrated in the United States, because that's where this market, I think, is most sophisticated and most mature. And our whole thing is really building a modern experience in the agency world, because the traditional providers are not always quite so modern in their approach. They're quite rigid in the qualifications required to become a travel agent at their specific agency, or they're at the other end of the spectrum, and there's very little by way of brand, very little by way of technology, very little by way of support. So we're really trying to thread something in the middle and create an experience for our community that allows anyone with the passion for travel, even if they're not able to do this on a full-time basis. So could be a sort of a part-time job, could be something you do in addition to a full-time job, or could be an entirely new career, a modern platform and brand and community to participate in this industry like a real modern travel agent, but with a very differentiated technology approach and a very differentiated approach to your community experience as an advisor within the Fora advisor community. So that was a mouthful, but that's kind of a reasonable, kind of medium TLDR of how we got here.
I knew there was no way to shorten that. And thank you for being a guest on Tourpreneur. We're out of time.
And exactly.
No, this is incredible. So I'm not going to go back to the ice ages of 2012 too much, but I am interested in sort of your read on this topic of distribution, which is the topic, right? You can have the world's best tour, but you need to get it in front of eyeballs that want to buy your tour. And so
yes.
So it's an age-old problem, and you're absolutely right. The OTAs get all of the flashy, I guess, attention. Everybody thinks they're sort of the behemoth to overcome. In some ways, short-term rentals, yes, they are the behemoths like Booking and Airbnb. But in tours and activities, it's a little bit different. Distribution strategy is actually it's multiple, right? And this B2B partnership building, this finding these kinds of key relationships with people that will sell your tours or help you is for us the theme that Tourpreneur is focusing on right now. And it's because it's very underutilized. And so I'm excited to spend the bulk of the time diving into that, especially in terms of travel agents or advisors. Before we get there, I want to get your read on the way distribution has changed given everything that's happened most recently with Google, with search, with AI, with everything becoming more expensive and less effective. What have you seen change in terms of that, in terms of ROI and how that kind of marketing has been working?
I mean, I think the thing that we hear from our partners is that we need new tricks besides OTA distribution, right? So I think if your only answer to how you reach your customer is via the OTA, that is a challenging place to be. You need to own more of your distribution. So that could be, we can talk about influencers and content creators and ways. I think you could probably offer quite a lot of insight about that. But that's why I do think it is also important to examine your distribution channels and not have all of your eggs in one basket. It is this challenge for any travel provider to really get good at multi-channel distribution at scale. And there are no super easy answers, but I think what clearly isn't the answer is OTA distribution delivering you everything that you need to deliver. Also, when you look at the soft brand experiments that some of the tours and activities OTAs have run, it is not it is basically the case, kind of like Booking.com and hotels, in my own opinion, that the idea is to soak up all of the excess margin, and just sort of leave you with kind of the bare minimum, and that doesn't really result in a successful company or successful kind of single kind of effort. Now, if you're a tour guide, you can get involved with one of the groups. So if you think about context travel, or you think about walks, depending on where you are, and that, of course, is another route to market as an individual. And that could be actually like, go to bed easy. You know exactly what you're earning per tour or per hour, and you don't have to worry about reaching the customer in the same way. But then again, that's an indirect means of distribution, so that may not be the right answer either. It kind of depends on your business.
So let's talk about this particular partnership level that you are working on, which is travel agents and travel advisors. First of all, what has changed in the last few years in terms of the landscape? And could you break down a little bit of the landscape of how travel advisors kind of work in general?
Yeah, so I think the thing that most people misunderstand about travel agents or travel advisors is that typically the industry operates on rate parity. So the idea really is no different than the idea of a Get Your Guide or a Booking.com. If you book a hotel on Booking.com, you don't expect that hotel to be more expensive. The business model is funded by the hotel, so funded by the supplier. Same with Get Your Guide. I don't know if Get Your Guide offhand has rate parity requirements if you have your own direct to market or direct to consumer kind of channel, but that is certainly very clearly the expectation and the norm, and probably the contractual obligation with hotels. So I think that's like the number one thing to understand, is that as a consumer, using a travel agent shouldn't cost more money. It should cost the same or similar. I say similar because sometimes with hotels, there's like different rates and things, like perk rates. So for free breakfast, you actually have to pay a little bit more for the free breakfast, but generally it's the same or similar for a better experience. So that's like the main thing to understand about advisors. I think the big thing that's really changed and accelerated by COVID is, even before COVID, 60% of the industry were so-called ICs, so freelancers that were not actually employed as a W-2 by an agency, and they were spread out all over the place. So quite a lot of fragmentation, which has historically made it more difficult to go to market as an advisor. Now, I think the thing that's really changed with COVID is that's accelerated even further. So people have left these like concentrated areas, they've left the big cities, or they've moved out of the city and they've moved to the suburbs. So I do think on one hand, that fragmentation has accelerated. On the other hand, we've gotten so good with technology that actually the reach is probably better than it's ever been, because everyone is like hyper networked now in the advisor community. I can show you our own WhatsApps that would show how much our advisors are interacting all day long. But I can tell you that as soon as an advisor at Fora has a hot tip about the perfect guide in Paris, and we saw this actually pronounced when I was at Context, that's going to get around like super quickly, because somebody at some point will be asking for a guide, a Louvre guide in Paris. Another advisor will know a Louvre guide in Paris, and you can actually build your presence in a much more viral and organic way than was ever before possible, because we've all gotten so used to these tools for engaging with others remotely. So on one hand, more fragmentation. On the other hand, more network than ever.
When you talk about Fora modernizing the travel advisor experience, what does that mean? How are you innovating in this space?
So across a variety of fronts, I think the democratization of allowing you to do this part-time and still supporting you like you're like a legitimate advisor is just like an operational new way of thinking innovation. But secondarily and tertiarily, and as we go down, so our training. So we believe that there is no one-size-fits-all to advisor training. You need to meet people where they're at. Where some people are at is they have a 9-to-5 job and they can only watch pre-recorded webinars. So we've invested an incredible amount in our training library. We actually had over 55,000 lessons completed last month in our training library. That is in addition to 20 hours or so per week of live training, because everybody has a different style. So some of those are more lesson-based, and some of those trainings are more office hours, kind of like come with your question based. So approach to training is one. Sort of networked way of working is another. So we really put community at the center of what we do here, because you could ask me a question about the best tour guide in Paris. I can give you my opinion, but if you ask me about the best tour guide in Tbilisi, I won't know because I've never been there. However, I can guarantee you that with our 5,500 active advisor community, you put that question on our forum platform, which is our communication platform that all other advisors use, or in one of our WhatsApp chats, you will get an answer to that question, and you will now have a guide in Tbilisi. So there's just something that the power of a network can do that no one individual or no small group of individuals can compete with. Third is a booking platform. So, our overall advisor platform is an all-in-one platform to research, quote, book, log your bookings, see your back office, access marketing enablement, marketing materials. So we think about that kind of like Compass did in real estate. We sort of do similar things for our advisors, where you have templates, social templates, email templates, things like that to like advertise your services. So that's a really big part of it as well. But then also a booking platform. So how do you book this hotel? Or how do you book this cruise or this tour? And the answer right now, the answer eventually will be you book it all in one spot. But the answer today is you book some of it on our platform. And for what we don't have on our platform, we give you really clear and precise instructions and guidelines for how to quickly book with that specific supplier. So that's probably like the key points of how this all feels very modern. Of course, the branding is very modern. But we've sort of borrowed from all of the best sort of technology-enabled analogs, and we've created something that we believe is unparalleled and unique to the industry at Fora.
Great. That sounds great. Little side question. How are your advisors then in general finding their clients?
So you start building your own book of business. So you start with your kind of own network. So we look for an advisor who is already a go-to person for travel tips in their kind of social network or in their professional network or, their church group or, whatever. And you start booking for friends and family. By the way, that's exactly how the industry works everywhere.
Yeah.
But we make it really easy for you to activate, for you to broadcast, again, with a lot of our templates and content that we provide kind of off the shelf. And then we make it super easy through training and through ongoing support to access referrals and to also, after certain booking thresholds are met, access house leads. So you kind of start on your own. But what we found, because the advisor experience, as I said, is generally not well understood for the client, that the client typically pays the same or similar but gets more value, that we have a lot of really happy clients. And you could look at our website and look at the reviews just to see. It's almost like, seems like fake, the amount of 5-star reviews that our advisors get, because generally the client is not paying for that service, but they're getting so much more value and just a better travel experience than they would have otherwise been able to access on their own. Of course, there's like the traditional stuff, curation and things, what hotel is right for me personally with my specific needs, or me, what tour should I do in Paris? That's another super important part of the experience of working with any travel advisor. Ours are just, I think, a little bit more networked and a lot more tech enabled.
So let's talk about networked a little bit. You've got a WhatsApp channel in which a tour guide is suddenly recommended in Paris or in Tbilisi. Do you also have your own internal database, similar to like a Virtuoso or somebody else, of suppliers that everybody is using that you can discover in more digital terms?
Yeah, that's a really important part of the advisor platform, which again, eventually you'll be able to book all of these categories directly in the platform. But where we don't yet have direct connectivity to a specific tour company, we give you very specific instructions about how to book that tour company. But you also have a list of recommended providers because we have had positive experiences with these providers. And when I say we, I mean our community, and they nominate specific suppliers, and then we vet them, and then they're all there for discovery.
So that's the name of the game for my community, which are those suppliers. We have two types, right? We have the walking tour guide or operator of various sizes and shapes across the world. And then we also have the packaged operators, not necessarily a Colette and a Tauk who work a lot with advisors, but a smaller Kenyan safari operator or someone.
Yes.
Can you walk me through how they can potentially interact with an advisor? Of course, a Fora advisor, but in general, because it's the biggest question in our community in terms of travel advisors is how do I get discovered? How do I find out? How do I network with a community of advisors?
Well, I think my very practical number one tip is to be curious and realize that you're running a business when you're actually delivering a tour, which means that you need to provide an excellent tour experience. But at the end of the tour, what you might have seen 10 years ago, maybe you still sometimes see it today, is please review me on TripAdvisor or whatever, because that was a route to market. I would be one step more curious, which is, how did you find me? How did you find out about this tour? I booked it through my travel agent. Oh, really? If you had a positive experience, can you introduce me to that travel agent? And I think it's like using the existing flow of business that you have, being curious about where that flow originates from, and then pulling on strings as hard as you possibly can as soon as you learn, oh, wow, actually, this came via a travel advisor who booked this via Context Travel. That's super interesting. How did that all work? And I think that is the number one tip that I could give, because it's also the same with our advisor community, which is, okay, great. Where do all the bookings, where do all the clients come from? Well, truthfully, they probably initially come from you having a very different type of conversation than you might have had historically with people that already view you as a great potential service provider. So that would be my sort of ways to get started recommendation.
When you are vetting then the supply that comes in, so it starts with a recommendation from the community, word of mouth, they had a great experience. What is Fora doing to ensure that it's a quality supplier, a quality tour operator that you're working with?
So it's definitely more challenging when it's not a brand we recognize. So typically it requires some level of advocacy from the community, or we spot trends that are happening in our existing business, which is, oh, wow, this small tour provider in Paris has been booked 14 times in this past month. We should probably learn a little bit more about their offering and whether we can codify that offering in the platform. So it's either sort of advocacy because our advisor has a really good experience and we hear about it that way, or we sort of spot it in the data.
Yeah, I mean that's a tension that I'm seeing in general with our industry, right? Which is that let's take New York City for an example. I'm trying to book restaurants. The easiest things to book are actually not the things that are the necessarily the most unique or hidden gems. Or the beaten
this
path
is the resi problem. Yeah.
It's the resi problem. I work as a student tour operator and everybody books Hard Rock Cafe. No offense to their burgers, but is it the best dining experience for 38th graders? No, probably some really interesting dumpling restaurant in the middle of nowhere Chinatown. But how do you find it? How do you book it? They don't have the processes in place. And so discoverability on both ends is the problem. And it keeps things a little cookie cutter.
That is the problem. It's exactly, so I remember in like 2016 or something, I was at a Focusrite event, and this was when all of these tours and activities, OTAs, were really coming of age, and Expedia had local expert or whatever. And somebody asked Glenn Fogel from Booking.com, why haven't you made a more concerted move in tours and activities? And he said, well, it's too hard to bring all that supply online. So, I that's why I'm not focused on it right now. So I do think that what's matured over the past decade or so is consumer internet, is social networks. So you can build like a brand and a reputation for yourself in a way that probably wasn't so straightforward 10 years ago. And there is, because of all the things that we've already discussed, excuse me, more sophistication on the sort of for the technology that we all have in our pocket and how networked kind of we all are together. So I do think distribution is a real challenge, but I think it has to start with you being proactive and taking that matter into your own hands, because otherwise, yes, he or she with the distribution muscle ultimately wins. It's one of the reasons why the large hotel groups have higher occupancy than the smaller hotel groups, despite the fact that boutique hotels are in many ways much more special than the chains. You need to get pretty good at this. And I think if you're an individual operator, you need to realize that it's like actually your problem to solve.
So in other words, things are better than they were. We're trending in the right direction in terms of getting supply organized, digitized, and they're improving.
I think they're improving, but I also think you as an individual have agency in getting your own brand and name out there. And you need to be thinking about this as a primary concern. That's not to say that the tour experience is a secondary concern. You can maybe have two primary concerns, but they need to be sort of equally weighted. Your go-to-market strategy matters as much as your tour experience, unless you're happy with your situation already. There's like sort of nothing on the demand side that you would want to improve.
As you look at your network of 5,500 advisors looking at the world and booking travel, what kind of data are you seeing in terms of trends and habits and the outlook in the industry right now?
Well, I think seasonality has really smoothed in the favor of providers. Maybe some of that is global warming. Maybe some of that is some of that is global warming, and maybe some of that is just flexibility that we all have in our like day jobs or like our daily existences that we didn't have, 5 years ago. But that means that you can actually build a business, in October in Europe in a way that maybe looked like July a couple of years ago. So that's a very, very positive trend. So we're seeing an expansion of the shoulders, what we would call the shoulder season. So that is certainly an important trend. We are also seeing more trips per year for the average traveler, although not always super long, super expensive trips. But it does mean that you can hit a level of consumers from a frequency perspective that I think was not the case 5 years ago, which may actually relate to this kind of spreading of shoulders, right? So people will spend 3 days or 4 days in Rome. It's not always this like Rome, Florence, Venice kind of grand tour for, 7 or 8 or 9 days. So that's like another pretty major trend. We could talk about sort of tourism generally and over tourism generally. Certainly, Italy was pretty packed last year. On one hand, we could talk about societally why that may or may not be a good thing. On the other hand, there's more hotel rooms coming online than ever in these big cities as a result of this trend, which means more commercial opportunity as well. And probably some halo effect in some of the secondary markets that you might have considered, quite challenging to access distribution. I think especially if you are close to a big sort of over touristed area, you have a decent chance of accessing demand in a way that wouldn't have been possible a few years ago.
Yeah, the over-tourism question and problem is really interesting, in particular to managing guest expectations in their imagination before a trip. what you sell them and what they experience afterwards. I'm wondering if and I know this as an operator myself in the past, that they want to see it all. It might be their one big trip to Italy, and so they want to see David, they want to see the Colosseum, they want to do
totally.
that. What is the Fora sort of playbook in terms of managing expectations, and then also trying to maybe like gear them or lead them towards places that they haven't heard of? They've never heard of Calabria, or they've never heard of somewhere else. And are you thinking of that?
So I would say we are not trying to, as a company strategy, we're not trying to move people from Rome to Puglia. Although individual advisors will offer that sort of advice. What we do try to ensure that we are all up to speed on is a few things. One is, if we just use Italy as a classic example, Italy has a few very, very big sites. Those sites sell out early. So actually, years ago when I was running Context Travel, the trend was always you book your air, you book your hotel, and then like a week before the trip, you book your tours and activities. We actually recommend maybe not a full inversion of that, but we book for these like high tourist destinations. We book the stuff, the experiences, often before we book the hotel. So that is a way that we are trying to mitigate the effect of the crowdedness of some of the venues. That's one kind of angle, or sort of one strand. Another strand is actually recommending, if you want to go to a big city, why not stay in an off the beaten path part of that city? And this is the thing that actually always amazes me as a traveler. Last year, I was in Venice with my family because everybody needs to go to Venice at least once. By the way, I love Venice. I think it's a great place. But we did not stay in St. Mark's. We actually stayed in Dosadoro. And it was empty. We could walk into any restaurant we would like to walk into. We can certainly walk into, we could certainly walk to St. Mark's and do what we wanted to do. But we also wanted to get out of there. And there actually, due to the sophistication of the hotel market, as an example, there's a lot of opportunity to get off the beaten path, even in these major touristed centers. So that is the other thing that we try to train advisors on. And I think Venice notwithstanding, Uber has gotten incredibly good. Taxis have gotten incredibly good. So if you look at where a lot of the new openings are in London, for example, they're not in the traditional like Mayfair, sort of, Covent Garden, St. James's corridor. They're in Bayswater, which is like very close to a neighborhood that I used to live in, Notting Hill. They're south of the river. So there's a new, I believe it's a Hyatt opening up, just a Park Hyatt opening up south of the river, which is something that would have never imagined years ago. But that's because mobility within the cities has also dramatically improved.
When we think about today's modern travel advisor, there's a lot of stereotypes of who an agent has been in the past. I'm wondering if you could just sort of finish on telling us about what kinds of people you're seeing today becoming advisors, especially a Fora advisor, when you're pitching yourself as particularly hip compared to some of the other more established old consortia or brands.
Certainly, without talking about age, it tends to be somebody who you would imagine as, a friend rather than a parent or something. So it's a peer more than it's, somebody of a different generation. So that's like a pretty big trend. I think, we're sort of, I think Fora is changing this a little bit, but I do think years ago, if you were this go-to person for travel tips, you didn't really know what to do with that besides share Google Docs with your friends. So a lot of this is building awareness that you could take this and turn it into something as big or as small as you would like. And so that's the way that we really try to present what this is, which is we give you a business in a box to turn your passion for travel into real work, real income, and quite a lot of fun and flexibility at that as well. So sort of serious sort of profession, but also a fun profession and a flexible profession. then you can make as much of it as you want to. I can tell you stories of advisors that earn hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, or, as little as you would want it to be, as long as you feel like your passion is being exercised. So, that's what we think about when we think about who should join our community. Is anybody who would consider themselves a go-to person for travel tips. I think a lot of tour guides are probably actually a good archetype for that. It is a career where you do have to hustle. So I think half of it, as we were talking about before, you could focus on experience, but you also have to focus on your go-to-market. So you have to be ready, I think, to build a business. But that is the type.
Yeah, in some ways it's very, very similar to kind of my company Trip School and what we do with tour guides and tour directors, which is we first of all mention to them that your idea of what a guide is and a tour leader is probably pretty old-fashioned and pretty stereotypical. And actually, it's much different than that, and you can create the kind of lifestyle you want. And I always thought there was a certain complementarity of professions in our two spheres in a way that creates a well-rounded individual.
Yeah, it's the rise of and you know what it's like to be a freelancer, and you need to cobble together a few different things to make it work. But if you can make it work, it's the most incredible flexibility that you could have.
And in some ways, it's the life you want, right? You don't want to be sitting there doing only one thing all year long. You want to be involving all the different things that you natively are good at all of a sudden in 2024, which is social media and putting yourself out there and creating video. Are you finding that social media, those who are succeeding sort of in being able to put themselves forward in a specific platform or a specific way are doing well? Or is it really more that kind of still relationship network kind of level?
I think it's the combination of the two. So I do think it is social media, but it's not like becoming an influencer. It's building a brand, and that a lot of social media is DMs these days. It's not like public stuff. It's not like being having 10,000 followers. It's having the right couple hundred followers or a couple thousand followers, and then keeping the content fresh and positioning yourself as the expert that you are, and then kind of evolving. And then meeting the client and evolving your kind of channel to meet the demand.
Final question, and I thank you for being here and sharing your advice and disambiguating this sector for us. But I'm going to go back to your time at Context. That's where I met you, and that's where I was once a guide for you and your family. I still remember that tour. And
totally. Me too.
I would love to know, when you entered the tourist and activities sector, what surprised you, or what caught your eye as a part of the travel industry that maybe you didn't quite expect?
Well, I think, what we would say at Context, and I believe it's true, is that it's like the best part of the trip. Like, that's really what you remember. I mean, there are some hotel experiences that you will never forget. But generally speaking, that's this eye-opening moment, self-actualizing moment for a family or for a traveler. It often clicks with the tour guide. And so what that means, though, is that it should come before all the other stuff. It shouldn't just be, oh, God, I don't know what I'm doing in 2 days from now. Let me organize myself. You should be planning your experiences as a primary sort of focus area whenever you're planning a trip. Because that's not the way it was. To answer your question, this is what surprised me, was how last minute the industry seemed to be, which results in a inferior client experience, and how important it is, if this is going to be something that is going to transform your trip, to be organized, proactive, and have advance notice when making your plans.
I think as a corollary to that, the more last minute somebody is booking your experience, the more they're not doing a lot of research, but they're comparing you on price and on reviews. If you're noticing that you're getting booked months and months in advance, that gives you actually also a little bit of leverage. It means that they are prioritizing you as kind of a keystone and a cornerstone of the whole travel experience. And that should give you important data on your pricing and on the value that you are to someone's vacation.
Totally agree.
Evan, Frank, thank you so much for being on Tourpreneur. Really appreciate it. If anybody in our audience wanted to learn more about Fora, what do you recommend? How do they continue their learning in the travel advisor space?
Our website and our social handle, which is Hello Fora, are a really good way to see what we're up to. You can be a traveler and come to our website and discover lots of things because our advisors create lots of content that we surface on our website and we've organized and indexed on our website. Or you can learn more about becoming an advisor as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mitch.